Ladies and gentlemen, I have made hundreds of videos about Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura, but the one that I am going to be showing you today is the most unique. I don't think it's ever happened before, and I'm not so sure it's ever going to happen again. So, what am I talking about? Well, I'm in Barcelona, and if you've been following my channel here in January 2026, you know that I was just in Madrid. I played a match against the French chess content creator Julien Song. We managed to come out on top, but the entire point of this trip was the fact that I was invited to an event in Barcelona, an event that combined Magnus, Hikaru, and myself, three of the best chess players in the world. They would play a blindfold exhibition game against each other. Timed blindfold chess, no increment. We also did a fireside conversation. We talked about chess, we talked about innovation, etc. It's pretty normal that conferences like to invite people to talk about certain things to spur creativity and inspiration for various people. And this time in particular, the three of us were invited. So there was a live stream of this, but to be honest, the live stream really did not convey just how fun and as much energy and buzz there was in person. The two of them sat there for this segment. Like I said, we also had a conversation. I would argue that if you watch the live footage, it was not really optimized for a live stream. It was kind of one of these, like, you had to be there. There was a real energy in the crowd. Maybe somebody in the comment section of this video will write what the experience was like. And certainly it was very fun. It has never happened before. Also, let me know if you like the new technical setup. In a much less echoey room. The microphone seems to be working quite well. This whole trip was an experiment for me because I traveled with this new microphone and camera, and they're both fantastic, but I've just never used them before. So let's cover this game. This was a very, very, very high level game of chess with a ton of details and components, even though neither one could see the board. And they both had to visualize it, and there was a ton of noise around. The conference was thousands of people, and there was music, and I had to commentate. I was sort of brought there as the clown. Shocking. I am not one of the stronger players. So knight to f3 is what Magnus opened with. Hikaru went d5, all very normal, and now e3. e3 is a very committal move. I've played these systems quite a bit. White wants to transpose into some sort of English opening, but you also want to defend the pawn with the bishop, and you also want to prevent black from playing d4, which if you had played c4 on this move, the best move for black according to the computer is to push the pawn forward. So I've played this with white poorly. Hikaru has played this with white with tremendous success, although that says less about the opening. Vincent Keimer also plays this quite a lot, the German phenom, but not the candidate. c4, e6, knight c3, and now the modern trend here with black to equalize in this position, which is extremely annoying that your average 9-year-old at your chess club, or Hikaru, and everybody in between now knows the way to equalize here, which is to play on the queen side with b6 and bishop b7 before you commit the bishop on the f8 square. And the way white has to play to gain any sort of advantage is really fascinating. So both guys develop their bishops over there, and now the best play here for black is to play pawn to a6, is to play bishop to d6, is to play knight to d7, and is to not touch the c-pawn. Because the second that you touch the c-pawn, white will play d4 after capturing and always has a pleasant position. But somehow everybody learned this. So Hikaru here plays bishop d6, which is actually technically an inaccuracy, because after this trade, Magnus can incorporate the move knight to b5. And that would be threatening the bishop simply from the perspective that you would get a favorable exchange of bishop for knight. That's all that means. Now, instead, he goes rook c1, which is normal. I don't have the timestamps here, but he actually was spending quite a bit of time in the opening. And now Hikaru immediately plays a6. I think there's definitely a level of like getting into the game. You need about like 7-8 moves to get an opening, to see how your brain is working. Now, what happens here is just heinous. Magnus plays knight e2, of course, completely not recommended for really anybody watching this video, unless it's one of the players to play like this, because you develop your knight and then you immediately bring it back to block your pieces, and then you have to again move it. Yeah, stick to what you know, stick to the center, knights, bishops, castle. Hikaru castles, Magnus plays g3, he's trying to put his bishop on g2, and after 11.5 moves, we have the following position. What's really fascinating is, like, up until this point, everything was good, but black apparently should have went knight to c6, which I don't even know how I'm supposed to explain the move knight to c6 to people, but the engine really thinks that that is the best move in this position, as opposed to the very natural knight d7, not blocking your bishop, rook e8, castles. And now white has several ways to make progress. He will probably put his queen here. He'll probably bring his rook to the middle. He's going to wait to commit this d-pawn when this c-pawn moves. The queen could reposition to a1. There are a lot of positions where the queen and the bishop actually fight on that diagonal. I know it looks utterly stupid, and it is kind of stupid. Like, if I'm really being honest with you, understanding this chess at this level is unbelievable. Here Hikaru plays bishop f8, which the move bishop f8 I couldn't even explain during the live commentary. Like, anything I explained live at the conference wouldn't be helpful to the players. They are obviously fully capable of understanding what's happening in the position. I didn't even understand this move, just period. I think the idea, really in the long run is you want to reposition here or even here, and Hikaru did end up doing that later, but it seems like such an unnecessary move right now. It seems like black still has multiple moves he can make to complete his development before he commits the bishop, and the computer agrees, but not like to such a huge extent. It thinks bishop f8 is completely reasonable. Magnus plays queen c2. Again, the queen pokes out. It stares down at now the unprotected pawn on c7. And now Hikaru plays c5. And Magnus can play d4 at this point, and he does. Like I said, generally the rule is c5 and d4. And now this will really open things up. You're going to open up some trading possibilities. You're going to open up and unclog the center of the board. Very high-level game. a5 is a move chosen from Hikaru, counterattacking on this side, also opening up this diagonal, which is going to come in tremendous handiness. It's going to be a tremendous use case for this diagonal in just a moment. Magnus does enjoy a 0.47 advantage, 0.4 advantage. In a classical game, seeing all the pieces not under a time constraint, he was already down about 2-3 minutes on the clock, which is substantial, right? It's also substantial when you don't see the board. Now he has multiple options here. He brings the rook. That's the only piece that hasn't gotten into the game. There is a clear and palpable tension here between the pawns. And you don't really know. You don't want to be the first guy to take, especially in the case of Hikaru. You would much rather be taken and kind of open up your position, bring more pieces to the middle. Rook c8. And at this point, white here can probably jump in with knight e5. But you can understand, when you don't see the board, it's so complicated. Like, it is so messy. The reason knight to e5 works, and this didn't happen in the game, is because after c takes d4, you have a queen sacrifice from Magnus, and Hikaru's queen is trapped. And you can't move it to c7 because knight e7 gives away the knight and wins an entirely free queen, whereas in this position, black could maybe play bishop a6 and create a counterattack. So just utterly absurd move knight to e5, just walking directly in and sacrificing your queen is what Magnus had to calculate. Instead, he opts for pawn takes c5, opening up his bishop, opening up the rook, opening up the d4 square for the knight. And while a very natural move here is pawn takes c5 for black, the rook would stay passive, the knight would stay passive, the queen would stay passive, the bishop would stay passive. And I think for that reason, Hikaru takes with the knight. It's a much more dynamic move. Dynamics in chess are basically coordination between the pieces and relying more on piece activity and piece flexibility and where they can maneuver and pieces controlling certain squares. And the trade-off for dynamics is static chess. That's what they always say, positional chess. Now black has an isolated pawn, but the isolated pawn is only a weakness when you trade multiple pieces. When the knights come off, the bishop, the queen, then this pawn is weak. But when you have all these open lines around it, this is a perfect use case of when the isolated pawn is actually an asset, because it's just blocking the position enough that Hikaru's position is not under any substantial danger. But as a counterpoint is that there's a tremendous amount of activity and danger to the white position. More on that later. Knight to c3. Magnus trying to go to b5. Knight c3 maybe not the best move. He could have considered knight to g5 here with just various ideas of hunting the king. That also would have opened up this bishop. Also, bishop h3 is a shockingly effective move because the rook is very, very strangely positioned. Personally speaking, I thought he was going to play queen b1. I thought this move is very fitting for the position. The two rooks are here. The queen, again, will go to a1 if necessary. Also, this f5 square, very juicy. The knight can jump there with knight h4, knight f5. I think in classical, Magnus would probably play queen b1. Frankly speaking, even in a blitz game where he sees the pieces, he would play queen b1. But we have knight c3. And now Hikaru plays queen e7. At this point during the broadcast, I was commenting how this pawn was protected 3 times by black. And then Hikaru here played queen e7, which protected it one last time. It was very clear, not really a hint to the players, but obviously they know what's going on. Now Magnus has to figure out what to do, and he plays the move knight d4. So this knight and this knight are going this way. The bishop is opening up with pressure on the pawn. These two moves, getting the knights in that direction, you still have a very clumsy queen. It's really difficult to get into a battle here with the black side because the queen really needs to get out of the way. The queen could go here and add pressure. The queen could just stand here, so it's not in the way. The queen could also go to b1. It's also a possibility. Now, the position is incredibly fascinating. The top line of the engine here actually wants just a recreational h-pawn assault. Just everything is good in black's position. Now you just throw the h-pawn forward and you give white the opportunity to take and kind of damage their own king. But what could be more natural than the move knight f to e4? And now Magnus, blindfolded and down 2 minutes, needs to find bishop h3 and now start repositioning this knight to e2, which it just was, and then to f4. Stockfish really, really likes this. It's just such a fascinating and messy position. You know, the knights are dancing, the bishops are standing on the two corners, you know, okay, that's not the right diagonal, but you get my point. But Hikaru's just a couple of moves away from not only activating the rest of his pieces, including his dark squared bishop, Hikaru's a move or two away from getting an extremely dangerous position with a 3-minute time advantage. So at this point during the commentary, I said a player in Magnus's position at this point does not want all the pieces on the board because he's blindfolded and he's running out of time. That's very stressful when you cannot monitor where everything is and your time is ticking, right? So Magnus finishes this plan of queen e2, but he's just going to walk directly into this bishop move, which, you know, the bishop is going to go from a 2.5 point bishop to a 3.5 point bishop. I mean, it's going to be an absolute menace on a6, very well protected. Hikaru plays g6 first, which is a reasonable move. I think he was sort of just kind of shutting down everything and opening up the possibility to move his bishop. I don't think Magnus liked this position very much here. He was spending a large amount of time. He ended up going to b5 here with the knight. Now, there is a threat. The threat is to play knight takes d5, or so it looks, right? Which is why this rook now goes to d8. It gets completely off of bishop h3, and Hikaru has lined up a defense and a potential offense on the e-file. When the bishop goes to a6, it will snipe the king side. This bishop is about to come alive and hit e3, while this knight hits f2. I mean, it is a very scrappy and dangerous position. So we have knight a4. At this point, I think Magnus went down to he went down about 3.5 minutes here. It was something like 12 for Hikaru and below 9 for Magnus. And like I said, it's quite clear white needs to do something. If white has an unlimited number of time, he can continue to kind of, you know, maybe make this trade, maybe whatever. But knight to a4 is a huge decision because it is trying to hit b6, it's trying to hit c5, and very, very elementary wisdom tells you, after black makes this trade, white has doubled a-pawns. Like you think, what? My pawn structure is terrible. Kind of. On the flip side, white immediately gains access with the c-file. White immediately gains access with this bishop. So white actually benefits from this trade, probably, more in the long run and even in the short term. Also, white has possibilities to go to d4 and target the b6 and a5 pawns. And this bishop no longer goes to a6 while protected in many positions. Which is why, in this position, Hikaru just played bishop h6. And really, he is a moment away from almost winning the game on the spot. Like, if white here plays knight takes b6, free pawn, it gets really crazy. Hikaru's going to play knight takes f2. Anything near a king that only the king protects, or in this case, the other most valuable piece, you always got to look at sacrifices. If queen takes, bishop e3 wins the queen. If king takes, you take with check, and the king has to hide out on f1, and now black plays d4, and if this trade were to happen, Hikaru would not only be threatening some knights, he would be threatening a literal mate on the other side of the board. And this is purely on positional domination. The two rooks support the pawn and the bishop. It cuts off the circulation of the white position. So it's just amazing how close Hikaru is here to landing a pure knockout punch in a blindfold game to calculate, no less. But of course, Magnus has everything under control. He plays bishop d4, which again, when I was watching this game live, you know, commentating for a live audience, distracting the players, it makes things a little complicated. But purely as a title player, and it's difficult to share this experience with you, you kind of just have to listen to it. You may not understand it. And this maybe is what makes the channel successful, is that I am a strong enough player to get what they are doing, but also I'm accessible enough to break it down for you and kind of explain things in a way that you get without going into the insanely deep variations. I was so fascinated by how out of nowhere, like, those knights danced from e2 and f3 to a4 and b5. He invades the queen side with the horses. The bishop pressures the queen side and defends the king. It's on the perfect square, and it snipes the king on the other side of the board. So now knight f2 is completely terrible because you just take it with the queen, and this pawn is very well protected by the bishop. But bishop d4 is also putting tremendous pressure on this side of the board, right? And so now Hikaru has to be very timely, and he finally gets the bishop to a6, immobilizing this knight because it's pinned to the queen, so you can't move the queen and you can't move the knight. So one bishop move controls 12 points of material. I said 14 and was like, since when is a knight 5 points? It's late. And now black is completely fine. And at this point, Magnus really went into the tank because I think he realized his position had run out of steam. It really just did. He doesn't have a move now. He has to commit to something. He has to commit to something. If he plays a move like, really, it's not easy to make any move. Like, if you just come back with the knight, for example. Now, black can take the knight, take your queen on a ride, and sack on f2. You lost a critical defender of your position, and here's a very nice and straightforward way that you can simply lose. Black here can choose either rook for a rook lift. This is a very nice way to use your rooks, and the king has absolutely no defense. No defense. No umbrella, thunderstorm, rook d6, rook f6. You will have to sacrifice a bunch of material. So, sensing this, Magnus went into the tank here. There's still many variations, actually. Like, you could take the knight on e4. You can take the knight on c5. You can play knight a to c3. You can take the knight on c5 like this. He opts for bishop takes c5. And Hikaru now can leave the center with the knight and trade it off for this one, or he can join with the b pawn like this. He opts to, in fact, go with the knight. Why? Because I think if the pawn took, he was a bit worried that the bishop could take the knight. And this is just the position where you end up with these three scattered, well, really two scattered pawns. And it can be a little tricky against Magnus to play a position with no clear initiative for black and some weaknesses. And I think a guy that has struck fear into many opponents, you know, like just pawn, you know, like here Magnus is just up a pawn and it's very comfortable. So black has to, you know, play obscure decisions here, like bishop back to f8, and I don't even understand where the compensation is for black, but he is just down a pawn. Instead of this, you know, Hikaru played knight takes c5, maintaining a very big lead on time, and now is the moment of the explosion in this game. White can take on b6, white can take on c5, white can take on d5 straight away, and white can take on d5 with the rook. So all those moves are possible. I think Magnus here went to like 5 minutes, already half the time of Hikaru. He had 5 to something like, let's say 10. And knight takes b6 is the crazy move. Knight takes c5 will lead to a lot of trades. If knight takes b6 is played, there is only one move here for Hikaru that really keeps him in the game. And not only does it keep him in the game, because it looks like he's just lost a pawn, he's going to lose another pawn. That not only keeps him in the game, it's extremely dangerous for white. d4. Like I said, just a wild game. You're pinned here, so you can't take with the knight. You're pinned here, so you can't take with the pawn, which means if you can't take with the knight or the pawn, it means that the rook is not actually threatening the pawn because it's already hit there. So the only move in this position for white, the only move, is knight to d5. And after knight to d5, black would sack the rook and then continue the assault on your king. And if something like f takes c3 happens, black trades the queen, like this, and then ends up winning the knight, still threatening the rook, etc. So it's, yeah, it's extremely messy. Extremely messy here after knight takes b6. White would need to play bishop d5, de, and here play the move pawn to f4, leaving the pawn here, blocking out this bishop. Something like bishop b5, queen b5, e2, rook e1, queen e3. It's just wild. Like, this position's completely insane. Like, it looks like it's just mate. And the only move here that saves Magnus, this is a 10-move sequence, is rook to c3, pinning the knight to the queen. And now the only move for black, why this position is equal, because you are pinned and it looks like you are simply losing material. Look at this. Bishop f8. Because after you lose the knight, you are always threatening bishop b4, removing the defense of the pawn. So something like queen d3, rook d3, and bishop to b4, and the position is equal after this sequence. Can you imagine if they found this blindfolded? I would have made them pee in a cup. Probably not on stage, but definitely in the green room. I mean, just absolutely insane. Now, if you're confused whether that happened or not because the board didn't change color, well, I like to preface things and I say that didn't happen. Instead, Magnus played very straightforward. He traded the knights and he picked up the pawn on d5. The problem is now that there's a very clear path to the end of the road. Hikaru does this. This again deflects the queen from the defense of the king. Now the king is actually looking very safe, but it's an illusion. Hikaru sacrificing a bishop, threatening the rook and also threatening to take on f2. If Magnus had pinned him here, looks like white just wins. Bishop takes f2 check, king takes f2, queen f6 check. The rook needs to take the rook, and then the rook will take the bishop. So king g2, you would play rook takes, and rook takes d5. And also you even have bishop takes f7, which is a Zwischenzug, which is completely crazy. And at the end of the sequence, you have rook d2. So there's just an unbelievable, like, look at this, and you have like rook to e2, only move. And this is just equal because black gives a million checks. Ultimately, what happened was this. Rook d5, Hikaru sacrificing the rook to draw the defender away. And even though it looks like black is actually winning here, he's not. He's not even going to go after one of the rooks, because if he goes after one of the rooks, this rook is hanging. That's kind of a miracle. So they repeat the moves here, and now Magnus's king goes for a run, and still instead of taking it because of this, there is queen e6 check. I mean, it's completely mind-blowing that Hikaru and Magnus both calculated a line where Hikaru sacrifices a bishop and a rook to hunt the white king out, and instead of winning back either of the rooks, which he can't do because the queen would take his rook, he calculates a perpetual check. It's just insane. And then here, after queen e6, you know, Magnus in his head just said, he actually said out loud king g2 because he thought, okay, they're going to repeat. But then he went king g2, wait, what am I doing? Because queen d5 is a check. And then he would actually lose the game. He said, you know, g4 and, you know, yeah, g4 and yeah, g4, something like queen e3, etc. What's amazing is king h4 is the correct draw, and then there's queen f6, and if rook g5, there is rook e4 check, and yeah, and so the king just keeps getting checked and keeps running around. It's just completely fascinating. In the game, we got g4, queen e3. And then the players repeated moves like this, which is kind of funny because in the final position, which is this one, and king g2, and the game was a draw. In the original repetition, the move rook e4 is actually better for black. You are threatening rook to g4, and if white protects it, you play queen c1 now, because your rook is no longer hanging. You brought in the rook for an attack on the king, so the best move would have been to sacrifice the queen. Rook c4, and this is probably a draw anyway, because queen here, you take this pawn, you take, you have to be careful actually, because you cannot, yeah, so rook d3, and this is the way probably white would draw it, by just playing like rook c1, rook c3, rook c5, and trading off the pawns, but I mean, like, this is such a high quality game of chess. This could have been a classical game. They were blindfolded with 15 minutes on the clock, poor audio. They couldn't, you know, the moves were being relayed live, but they were struggling to hear. I had to do a little bit of commentary because we had a live audience. There's music all over the place. You know, they're wearing some headphones. I'm not sure they're even working. Meanwhile, these dudes just put on like an absolute clinic. Like, I'll game review this game. It's not going to be completely flawless, and you know, maybe chess.com is going to be a bit, you know, brutal. We'll see if it loads or if it completely you know, crashes my computer. But yeah, I was completely blown away by this. It was such a strategic game with so many little like knight maneuvers, and Hikaru bringing the bishop all the way back to f8 like he did, and then putting them both out on the corners, you know. Yeah, so look at this. This is the game analysis. You can't see it, it's underneath me, but I'm gonna hide the camera for a second. 96.3, 96.8 with 2 brilliant moves from Hikaru. Yeah. Good luck to the rest of us, really. I mean, just unbelievable. But yeah, it was a pleasure to, you know, to be there to host this. Shout out to everybody who was there in person. Not too many. I think most of you will just enjoy this at home. Just incredible, really. That's all I have for you today. A unique piece of content, a blindfold exhibition game, live audience between Magnus and Hikaru. Not sure that's going to ever happen again in the setting that it did. But yeah, I will now fly home. That's all I have for you today. Get out of here.